or in true Italian fashion, Abate, though he uses Abate. And he is here to talk to us about careers in animal law, which is, I think, a growing area of law practice. When I first got involved with animal law about 20 years ago on this faculty, my colleagues would tease me and ask me whether I would have a petting zoo in my office and things like that. And that shows there's a certain giggle factor there or lack of respect, but I think that's not the case anymore. People understand the importance of animal law, protection of animals, both domestic animals held as pets and farm animals, and now wild animals in the environment, ocean life, and other wildlife, and so on. So there are many, many aspects to animal law, and Dean Abate is going to explore possible careers in that area. Dean Randall Abate is Assistant Dean for Environmental Law Studies at the George Washington University Law School. He has nearly 3 decades of experience teaching, writing, managing programs, and mentoring students on domestic and international environmental law issues such as climate change, law and justice, ocean and coastal law, constitutional law, and torts, as well as animal law. He has taught and lectured on these topics in over 25 countries, including China, Qatar, the Kyrgyz Republic, Kyrgyz Republic, and South Korea. He's a recipient of a Fulbright Specialist Grant. He led a climate change law and justice course at the National Law Academy in Odessa, Ukraine in April of 2013. He's published 6 books, more than 30 law journal articles and book chapters on environmental and animal law topics. So please join me in welcoming Dean Abate.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming. And I assume all of you in person and online know that I'm here all week, as the comedians say, sort of. So I've got a lecture tomorrow on animal law and environmental law. So that'll be a little more substantive. And today is more kind of the strategy about thinking about careers in the field of animal law. And it's ironic that I would be giving that kind of a talk because I haven't practiced animal law, and I was a latecomer to the field of animal law as a scholar and teacher. But what I do bring is a lot of, well, almost a decade now of mentoring students who were taking my animal law classes and also very much interested in the intersections between animal law and environmental law and how that is opening more career opportunities for those who are interested in animal law. So what you'll hear from me today is more of a non-traditional kind of discussion, if you will, of where the animal law field is now, different entry points, and in particular, how to maximize your time as a law student to position yourself for these opportunities, because it's certainly evolved quite a bit. And I've also seen that in environmental law in the 3 decades I've been there, but in the 1 decade doing animal law, I think it's taken off even faster. There really is a lot happening right now and many opportunities, but you still need to work at it. Those opportunities aren't going to find you like many traditional areas of law. So to give you a sense of the roadmap for today, I want to talk about some of those kind of entry point considerations in strategizing to break into a field that is new and that does require some creativity and persistence. And then focus first on your academic experience, what you can do while you're in law school, and position yourself for opportunities in career paths in animal law. And then something that I've really worked a lot with my students on is I think it's easy to underestimate the value of getting published when you're a law student. I've taught seminars for students in largely environmental classes, but also animal law classes. And more than 50 of my former students have been published. Many of those students, their publications were what set them apart from their competitors and actually helped them get a foot in the door for an interview and even a job offer. You'd be amazed how quickly you become an expert on a topic when you are publishing an article in a law journal. Especially when it's not your school's law journal, when you're competing with law professors and attorneys to be placed in an outside academic law journal, you will be sought out to be a speaker on a panel once you're published. And a lot of my former students, very shortly after they were published, were sought out as experts on their topics. So can't stress that enough. And of course, networking is one of the areas that I generally have to nudge students a lot with. And it wasn't something that I was a natural at by any means when I was in law school. And I certainly, at the time, was pursuing a career in environmental law. And of course, networking was important there. But as someone who's aspiring to animal law, networking is even more important. You have to put yourself out there. You have to attend events. You have to talk to people. You have to talk to friends of the people you meet, and that's very much going to open some doors sooner or later. And then, of course, there are some really exciting internships and fellowships that are available in the animal law field. Very competitive, but certainly ones that you should be aware of and applying for. And of course, the message from me would always be apply as broadly as possible. Never self-select yourself out of contention for anything, regardless of how competitive it is. There might be something about your application that gets attention that you don't realize. And then it's also about shooting for the stars and also shooting in your backyard. When we're talking about the NGOs that do an animal law work, sometimes getting even a volunteer position is going to start you on a nice path, even if it's a local NGO that's not well known nationally. Still, anything that's animal related on your resume is very, very important. And last but not least, I'll be talking about mentoring, which is critical in a field like animal law. Getting the people who are going to bat for you as early as you can, as often as you can, and be prepared to work for free. And that's true in a lot of areas around law school, getting employment while you're in school. A lot of my 1Ls at GW, a top 25 law school, I'm telling them you have to be willing to work for free if you want to get into a field that is very subspecialized, like environmental and certainly animal law as well. So I think the first thing to embrace about strategizing career shopping in animal law is to embrace the breadth of this field. You know, a lot of people see animal law as very subspecialized and a bit quirky still. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what animal law is. They pigeonhole it, sorry for the pun, but they think about animal law as only companion animals or only agricultural animals or only animals in research. But the field is expansive. And I think those of you who haven't had an animal law course yet, it's really important to be thinking about that as you try to position yourself for a career in animal law. When I teach animal law, I bill it as the best bar review course in disguise. It is that expansive. So a traditional animal law course will cover torts, contracts, property law, criminal law, constitutional law, environmental law. And so it's really anything but this quirky peripheral kind of field. It reinforces so much about traditional lawyering skills if it's something you're able to take in your third year. It really is a nice way to gear up for the bar in a much more interesting way than just a traditional bar prep review. And of course, the other thing is, another thing is patience. That, you know, these opportunities are few and far between, but they're growing, which is good. But that coupled with how competitive they are requires you to say, okay, if I want animal law as part of my career, if not the focus of my career, I have to be willing to take incremental steps. So that might mean a general law practice where you're doing pro bono work, pick up cases that are animal law related, get the animal law experience, do things that are animal law related, even though you're working as a personal injury lawyer, do dog bite cases. I mean, there's always ways of getting animal law into your practice, whatever you're doing. If you're an environmental lawyer, work on wildlife cases. So you have to be patient in that sometimes it's about creating the opportunities, and that's going to take time. Many specialized fields are looking for lawyers that have been out 5 years. So if you want to be an environmental litigator, it's very difficult to land that opportunity right out of law school. Employers want experience as a lawyer to do something that's specialized lawyering. So that's even more true with animal law. And then there's the creativity part that is, sometimes it really is about your background and how you can create an argument that you have a skill set that could be useful to be this animal law person at the firm in some capacity. So you might be working at a firm that does estates and trust work, and pet trusts are now a big growing area. So you might be the pet trust person at that firm that is doing largely straight up estates and trust work, but you can build your own client base and ultimately be sought out for that expertise. And so it does require creativity on your part. What is your skill set? What can you offer? So in any workplace where you find yourself, there is likely something animal law related you can offer and start to build expertise in. And then the ambition piece really is about, there's really no limit on what you might be able to do because the field is so new. So you have to think really big. I mean, if you want a career in animal law, there might be something you're really passionate about. And I think that in part applies to the scholarship notion. The idea that if you have an opportunity to write any kind of in-depth paper in law school, hopefully more than one, do something related to animal law. If you know you have the interest in animal law, getting published on an animal law topic automatically sets you apart into a very small group of candidates. And likewise, it might be something that could require another set of skills that you don't have. So you might be considering some kind of other master's degree or something if you're in some kind of joint degree program or thinking about study beyond law school. It might be about more of a long haul to get another set of skills that will train you to be that animal lawyer that you want to be. And we're now seeing a growth in LLM programs in animal law. So Lewis and Clark used to be the only game in town, and that's not going to be true for long. GW is now positioning itself to be a powerhouse in animal law. My colleague Kathy Hessler was one of the most well-known animal law professors at Lewis and Clark. She is now the dean of the animal law program at GW, and we're working together day and night. We're 2 doors down from each other, and we're already talking about an LLM that would focus on animal and environmental law synergies and really distinguish ourselves and distinguish our graduates as a special skill set that opens even a broader set of possible career paths. So yeah, it's a lot about thinking big and not waiting for opportunities to find you. And then leadership is really, really important. I mean, when I look at some of the lawyers I now see practicing animal law that were somewhere in the past 10 years of my teaching and mentoring, they're leaders. They are absolutely not the ones who sat in the back of the class and were passive. They were the president of the SALDIF chapter at their school. They were speaking at conferences. They were getting published. They were really the trailblazers. And I think that's really important about getting into the animal law field. It's not like you just get good grades and a big firm's going to chase you. It just doesn't happen that way. Also, you might have a set of skills that you brought to law school that are very relevant for animal law. So that might be some kind of science background that's relevant for animal law work. That might be something that intersects with animal law, like food, agricultural background, environmental. There's a lot of interdisciplinarity that pertains to shaping an animal law career path. And then really anything that's immersive. So if you can get any kind of semester-long or summer-long position doing something related to animal law, that too sets you apart because there's just not that many opportunities. So a lot of that will happen based on a lot of those initial skills to create, in many ways, those opportunities to do animal law work. Based on where you're looking and who you're connecting with, you might be able to create some of those opportunities based on your skills, based on your achievements. So this is a challenge, and this is kind of an example of using your ambition, your commitment to try to break into this field. How many of you have had an animal law course? Nobody. And that's unfortunately common. But that doesn't mean, okay, let's just sit and pout about that. Animal law courses are available if you want them. So there are summer programs that offer online animal law courses, and I encourage you to look into that. Certainly Lewis and Clark and Vermont are among those programs that do offer animal law courses. I'm not sure if they both offer them online, but certainly they're available in person at both of those schools in a shorter summer session intensive kind of approach. And if it's not offered at your school, do the advocacy that it takes. And that's why I taught animal law for the first time, because I was teaching at Florida A&M at the time. They had never taught animal law at the school. And thankfully, the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund, or the Animal Legal Defense Fund, offers what are called seed grants to all law schools. If animal law has not been taught at your law school, you can apply to the Animal Legal Defense Fund. They will pay for your school to hire the adjunct to teach animal law. And that's how I taught animal law for the first time, more than 10 years ago now. So yeah, like I said, it requires persistence and creativity. And then sometimes it's about finding electives that are animal law relevant. So that's where you need to think as broadly as you can. So there might be some kind of advanced elective in estates and trusts that's a paper course, and that might be your opportunity to write a pet trusts paper, for instance, to get published. There are lots of environmental classes, certainly, that are animal law relevant. So protection of marine mammals, Endangered Species Act cases, international environmental law, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. So yeah, a lot of it will pertain to what your area of interest is. So even in advanced criminal law class, you could write about anti-cruelty protections for animals. So it really is about what your interest, your area of expertise is, and there's often a way to find a place in your law school's curriculum to do something immersive. Even if you don't have full-time faculty members who are teaching their, labeling themselves as animal law profs. So I would encourage you to look for those summer courses around the country now that are offered on animal law. And sometimes when there's a real commitment to be in a city, and this I think is kind of a last ditch resort, but I think it has really a lot of value for the right candidate. Sometimes a visiting student status would be worth it to you. So let's say you're going to law school in Chicago because there was something really attractive about what brought you to Chicago to get your degree. But let's say you plan to live in Portland, Oregon when you graduate, in which case it would make, in my mind, a lot of sense to visit at a school, excuse me, visit at a school like Lewis and Clark for a semester, take courses in animal law and environmental law. If you know you want to practice in that area, you could be a visiting student for a semester. So it might just be a summer course, or it might be more of an immersion kind of an opportunity that way. And of course, these research and writing opportunities are bigger than ever. So it's not just writing a full-blown semester research paper. It is more about writing anything related to animal law. It might be a blog entry. It might be an op-ed in a local newspaper. Anything that you're passionate about that you feel like you could write something of short, medium, or long length about, do it. Getting published is really, really critical. So I think one thing that a lot of students aren't aware of is that for many years, actually what kind of inched me toward teaching animal law before I did was that there's these animal law competitions, moot court. It's a competition that's called animal law advocacy, and there's 3 of them within one package. So there's animal law moot court, there's animal law legislative advocacy, and then there's animal law closing argument competition. So these used to be hosted by Harvard and Lewis and Clark. Now they've been taken on by what's known as the Brooks Institute. So this is a private organization that has a lot of financial leverage behind it, and it has reinstituted these competitions. They went away for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, but they were fantastic opportunities for really immersive experience in animal law advocacy. So they are, this year they're being, they're already happening. They're online only. Hopefully next year they'll be back in person, which is much more valuable. But a lot of my students who participated in those, you're writing a brief. For instance, if you're in the moot court competition, you're writing a brief about a cutting edge animal law topic. You're presenting an argument before many of your judges are animal law professors or practitioners. You impress them, they're going to want to talk to you about potential job opportunities. So it's got all of the things that I've been telling you are valuable in one opportunity, which is really worth considering. So some of you are already on journals, perhaps, and that's yet another opportunity for publication. So it doesn't have to be in a seminar paper. It could be your journal note if you're serving on any kind of a journal connected to an animal law topic. And the SOLDIF leadership positions, as I mentioned, are really very important. So as a leader in your SOLDIF chapter at your school, you're the one that's very much of a point of contact for people who are brought in, guest speakers, holding events in the community. It's building a resume that you're committed to animal law, that you are engaging in the subjects that you want to do in your career. So I think that's really valuable. And there's all kinds of financial support. So for instance, the opportunity to attend the annual Animal Law Conference, which is a really exciting and one of the best conferences in my view ever for law students and law professors. It's held once a year. It's often held at Lewis and Clark, but it's been held in other cities like Chicago. I was here for that conference maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And basically what the Animal Legal Defense Fund offers is travel grants for students in their SOLDIF chapters at their schools to attend wherever that conference is being held. They'll pay for your airfare and lodging costs. There's a certain amount that they offer, like $500 per student or something. And that's amazing. As a student, that would have been, pretty steep price tag for me to cover myself. But if the ALDF is paying for my travel, I'd be more than happy to attend. So another great thing about that conference is that they recognize individual chapters for what they've done for their previous year. So this year, I'm proud to say that GW was recognized as a chapter of the year. And when I was at Florida A&M, they were recognized as a chapter of the year, I think in 2017. And the students who were involved in both instances were those true leaders. They were doing so much well beyond what those chapters had done in the past. And at a national level, they were distinguishing the school for its commitment to animal law issues. So that's just, the work of a couple of ambitious students who really want to make a difference. And the framework of getting recognized already exists. So there are Chapter of the Year awards. There are individual scholarship recognition awards for exceptional work on animal law issues for students as well through ALDF. And they have a separate student conference, which enables you to, as a student, present a paper at this student conference. So if you are working on something, regardless of whether it's been published, you can submit it for presentation purposes at that student component of the annual conference. So there are a lot of animal law NGOs out there, the non-governmental organizations that commit themselves to animal law work, but it's still a narrow field compared to other fields. So to the extent you want to do public interest animal law work, apply to all of them. I mean, there's just not that many of them, and you're probably familiar with most of them. And this is what I also say to students considering environmental law. They say, they ask me, I want to do public interest environmental law, so that means I probably shouldn't apply to law firms, right? I say, no, absolutely not. If you're interested in a particular field, you should apply to all the opportunities that are available in that field, regardless of what side of the fence you're experiencing in that particular role. So animal law has a similar dynamic about don't be so choosy. So there are some groups that are more animal rights focused that kind of push the envelope a little bit, and you might think, well, I'm not that liberal, but it's still incredible legal experience. So even if you don't think you would be comfortable working your entire career for PETA or for the Non-Human Rights Project that are, that's bringing habeas corpus lawsuits to free chimpanzees and elephants on legal personhood grounds, you should do it. I mean, these are great opportunities to have on your resume, work with really outstanding lawyers, even if it's something you can't imagine doing in your career, do it as a law student internship. And many of these now, post-pandemic, are remote. So absolutely apply to everything that's listed as available, and then talk to these organizations about, well, I'm going to be in Chicago this summer, and you're based in Colorado, but can I do some remote work for you? It's can't hurt to ask. Many of those opportunities are now available post-pandemic. And then there's a lot of these lesser known local ones. So just be very comprehensive in any kind of organization, any kind of firm that might do something related to animal law and apply to them. I think the opportunity, though, to do it during the school year is perhaps even more valuable because it's meant to be a structured academic experience. So the supervision, there's more of an investment in the supervision if you're doing something as an academic internship as opposed to a job for pay, where, depending on the employer, they're likely just going to throw work at you if you're doing well and thank you, here's something else. But when it's structured as an academic internship for credit, you're likely to get a higher quality of academic supervision of your work, which is what you want. I think it's good to do both, do those things for pay and for credit, but the ones for credit tend to have more of that supervision structure built in, which is really valuable. And you're going to see a lot more of these post-grad fellowships. Again, the kind of crown jewel opportunities are with organizations that are well established. So PETA offers a fellowship. I believe it's a 2-year animal rights litigation fellowship. I have a mentee who's in that role now, and she absolutely loves it. And then there's the Animal Legal Defense Fund. So there's someone who's a graduate of GW Law School before I came, and I'm having coffee with him tomorrow. He is one of a very short list of nationwide ALDF litigation fellows. He got that right out of law school. So they are super high level positions. You just get thrown right into strategic animal litigation when you work for an organization like ALDF or PETA. And that it pays a living wage. You're obviously not going to get rich with public interest salaries, but it's an income that can support you. And it's a career path. Once you get into one of those major organizations doing work, then you're really set to transition to other organizations that do that kind of work. Humane Society, ASPCA, Animal Welfare Institute. A lot of these are based in DC, so sometimes it makes sense to make a commitment to be in DC and see what you can get in a particular summer. And then, of course, ALDF is also great as a repository when you've graduated, a repository for pro bono opportunities. So if you're doing any kind of legal work, you can connect with ALDF on their website. They have a pro bono program, and they have cases that they're just looking for attorneys who want to help animals on a pro bono basis. And that's something you can put on your resume. You worked on these cases involving pro bono support of animal law issues. So networking is super important, as I mentioned. I think that animal law conference, it would be a huge mistake not to get yourself to it, regardless of whether you get a travel grant. It is so valuable for networking purposes. First of all, it's one of the largest networking type conferences that I've ever participated in. I've done a lot of those in 30 years in academia. So a lot of the people practicing animal law full-time are either speakers at this conference or they attend the conference to connect with a lot of their colleagues on an annual basis. And there are students from all over the country, and don't underestimate the importance of just talking to fellow students in animal law. They'll have some ideas, they'll have some connections that might be valuable to you. So I think just as a networking opportunity, that annual animal law conference is essential. Then you've also got opportunities in your own city. So for instance, on Friday in my tour here in Chicago, I'm speaking at a CLE that is hosted by the Illinois Bar Association's Animal Law section. And they are hosting an event that involves what's known as humane washing, kind of a variation of greenwashing related to animal protection issues. So I'm speaking at that on Friday. So you've got state bar associations that have animal law sections. You've got county and city bars that have these animal law sections. You've got the ABA has its animal law section. So there are all kinds of ways that you can be networking with attorneys who are doing the work that interests you. And in addition to those networking opportunities, be informed on the issues. So subscribe to all of these NGOs' newsletters. You know, it's always free. You just go to their website and it says, you know, subscribe to our newsletter. Just put in your email and follow what they're doing. And a lot of times it will inform what might interest you about getting some kind of animal law related work. So it's really important to connect with folks who are doing this work in every way you can, whether it be through information or networking or participating, attending events of these lawyer groups, these animal law sections. But what that really gets to is when you're connecting with all these different people, that's where you're seeking and hopefully securing mentors. So for my students, it was easy. I was a full-time professor who was teaching animal law. Everyone who took an animal law course with me and was interested in animal law got a mentor for life. However long they wanted to be mentored, I was happy to do it for them. If you're not in an animal law class and you don't have full-time professors who are in the field, you've got to work a little harder to find those mentors. You just got to put yourself out there and say, I want this animal law career. And you'd be surprised how among lawyers, animal lawyers are probably the most supportive and compassionate people you'll meet in the field. They really want to build the network of animal lawyers. So they're going to be very receptive to offering you guidance and support in what you're trying to do. And so I think that's really important to think about when you're thinking about is animal law a possible career path or not. A lot of times the mentors will give you that honest assessment. You know, if you want to do this as a career path, here's how I'd recommend charting it out over 5 to 10 years. And they've had different experiences, so don't listen to just one mentor, including me. I mean, just talk to a lot of different people about what it means to practice animal law and how that might manifest. And of course, volunteering is essential. And when I was in law school, I was fully prepared to volunteer, and I did. And one of the volunteer opportunities I did was working for the then director of their environmental law program at Vermont Law School, where I went. And after doing that for a summer, the following summer, I was published as a co-author with that director of the #1 environmental law program. So the investment of your time and interest is always going to pay off sooner or later. Don't think about it as a dollar and cents transaction, because that's not going to get you where you want to be. It is about the quality of the work that you're able to do, the quality of the supervision, and that's kind of building this momentum to get you where you want to be. I realize you have to pay your bills, and you know, as law students, that's something that if it requires working at the coffee shop to pay your bills and volunteering for something that's fascinating on animal law, then do it. You just have to be flexible, because these are not traditional careers, and a lot of what you get is going to be what you put into it, and what sort of people you find to move you along those paths. So I'm happy to take your questions, get a discussion going about all this, hear a bit more about what interests you and how I might be able to be a resource in talking about where you're trying to get.
Questions for Dean Abate?
Yeah.
Dean Abate, well, thanks for being with us today. With regard to the animal law conference, is it something a student has to be send up an application and be invited to, or what's the process?
No, so that's a good question. So the conference typically spans 3 days. So you've got a Friday, which for the conference itself, it doesn't really start on Friday. So Friday is the student conference for this 3-day event. So the student conference is a full-day event, and you can absolutely attend that without being invited. There is a component of the student conference where they do a call for papers, and you submit either an abstract or the completed paper. And if you're selected, you can be a presenter at the student conference. So I can't remember if it's an abstract or a completed paper. I think it is a completed paper because I think they have a writing competition where student papers are recognized. So at a minimum, it's open to everybody to attend, and I highly encourage you to attend. But to the extent there is opportunity for individual recognition, apply for all of that. So some of that is chapter of the year and student recognition awards and scholarships, and presenting at the student conference. And then there's 2 days of speakers, professors, and attorneys on animal law issues that is really valuable to attend and network with these people who are there for the full 2-day conference in chief, if you will. And this conference tends to occur in late October, early November of each year. That's been pretty standard, although, like I said, it's rotated locations. And then there have been these smaller but equally significant spin-off conferences. So at GW, we hosted one of those. So an ALDF symposium that we hosted in DC last September was a full-day event, and a similar reality, a mix of the professors, attorneys, students, all getting together, networking. And there wasn't a formal student opportunity to present there, but a very good networking opportunity. And those kind of spin-off conferences have been all over all of the country, kind of like a 1-day version of that larger annual animal law conference. Yeah.
You mentioned like having things on a resume and experience anything related to animals. What would you, or I guess, what's your opinion on things like related to activism? You know, if that makes sense. Like, is it potentially by you, or is that actually going to look like good? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, there's this field that's emerging now called movement lawyering, and I think that's where animal and environmental issues are coalescing a bit more. So you've got these parallel movements of animal rights and rights of nature that are happening simultaneously and are very synergistic. And in many ways, they're using the same kinds of objectives and have the same kinds of goals, which is to mobilize kind of awareness and political will to get better protections for nature, for animals. And sometimes it's brought through traditional court cases, but sometimes it is about advocacy at the grassroots level or at the state and federal legislative level. So you'll see organizations that are engaged this way in all those different capacities. You know, sometimes they've got a very big federal legislative lobbying outfit, and then they've got more local grassroots stuff going, and then they've got some strategic litigation as well. So absolutely, activism on any issue, I think, would be well received by any organization that's doing animal law, because it's not traditional law. So it needs that kind of grit and zeal behind what you're doing. So even though you'll see at a lot of these major NGOs that hire lawyers to do animal law work, a lot of them come from the traditional, very, top tier schools, but those people are not your typical top tier law students. They're not just sporting great grades and planning a career in the private sector. They're committing their careers to making a difference from a public interest perspective. So activism is a part of that. And there's a spectrum of what activism means. And so, your question might go to more kind of ambitious activism and how that might be perceived by at least some mainstream organizations as a little too much. And that's true even within the movement itself. So if you ask the Humane Society, they'll tell you that PETA's too into being in-your-face activism. It's not the brand of activism that another animal NGO believes in, more kind of mainstream animal welfare work. So you do have to do your research about where you'd like to be and what sort of experience they prefer. I remember my son was considering a career in animal law, and one thing that he was really kind of shocked by and very disappointed by when he was doing internships at some of the major NGOs that are committing themselves to animal advocacy work. He was amazed that, at HSUS and at ASPCA, he was finding that a lot of the employees weren't even vegan. And so for him, that was really a failure on their part. I mean, the commitment to the cause that he would have expected for animal activists who are devoting their careers to protecting animal welfare and rights should come along with that lifestyle choice of, you're living in a way that's protecting animals as well. So, but there's different thinking on that, and there's a real divide in the animal law movement between welfare and rights. And everybody kind of comes down on that spectrum one way or another, and we just have to learn to get along, that we're all in it for the animals and at different levels and different strategies. But I think activism is one of those things that's much more relevant for animal law careers than it is for something like environmental law, which is more institutionalized. It's an older field that there's more ready-made opportunities there to do traditional lawyering in that kind of field. And animal law is still evolving, and activism still matters a lot for a lot of these NGOs.
And we have a question online. I'm an undergraduate student and I want to attend law school someday. I'm very interested in animal law. Do you have any advice for someone still early on in the process and some examples of other career options in the field?
Yeah, that's great. I love talking to undergrads. So I was teaching at the undergraduate level, teaching environmental law courses and animal law courses. And I was just thrilled when I have 18 and 19-year-olds approaching me saying, I want to be an animal lawyer. It's like, wow, you've come to the right place. I want to be an environmental lawyer. I wish I knew that when I was 18 and 19. I might have been somebody. So the first thing I say is absolutely take the courses that are relevant to your interests. So really a university or a college tends to offer a broad foundation of courses that would be relevant to someone who's interested in animal law. So that could take a lot of forms. That could be, food science. That could be agricultural policy and science. That could be marine biology. There are a lot of ways that an undergraduate education can connect you to foundational aspects of what an animal law career might value. And so I think a lot of it is just deciding what your skill set is and what you're willing to learn about and get exposed to and get good at. For me, I couldn't do the science. I was smart enough to recognize that early on, that math and science were not my thing. And I just steered clear of those things. But I think a lot of it has to do with working within what your major is, and then also looking for electives that are going to be very useful. And then likewise, it's not so different from the law students, getting those practical experiences that expose you to what animal law is. And it might be working with those same NGOs, just in a different capacity. So my son wasn't doing, brief writing and oral arguments when he was interning for HSUS and ASPCA and Humane League. He was doing more of what an undergrad could do. So, humane education and vegan outreach type work and policy work, government initiatives, federal and state legislative type work that didn't require legal experience. So I think, if someone knows at an early level at the undergraduate stage that they're interested in an animal law career, they're just so well positioned to build that network, to build that exposure, and are in a much better place to know even where they want to go to law school based on what they've learned in that process of getting exposed in undergrad. So yeah, I want to talk to everybody who wants to continue the conversation, but particularly the undergrads, because there's a lot of mentoring that can make a difference instead of, like I did most of my education, just stumbling around and thinking I had it all figured out, and I didn't. And I didn't have too many mentors along that path. So yeah, I think in terms of other things related to undergrad exposure to it is watch the animal law documentaries. I think they're really powerful. I think they're very much gateways into what animal law is. So some of the major ones I'm sure you're familiar with and may have seen them. So you've got the Non-Human Rights Project has one about their advocacy work. It's they've got a couple of different ones, and the certainly related to animal protection through a vegan lens. I mean, actually, the one that my son saw with me when I was preparing to teach animal law is called. It was the really radical one with Joaquin Phoenix as the narrator. Well, I'm drawing a blank on it now.
Dominion,
No.
Earthlings.
Earthlings, thank you. So he watched Earthlings with me, and he was vegan the next day and never turned back. So, I mean, I think there's a certain level of, degree to which these documentaries kind of hit you between the eyes, make you have this kind of confront your values in a very important way at an early age. And Cowspiracy was a very good one when I was teaching in animal law for the first time. I mean, as an environmental law professor, it really opened my eyes in ways that I hadn't been thinking about. And Racing Extinction's another one, Forks Over Knives. So there's a whole long list, and they're just readily accessible on the internet these days, and I think they're really worth watching. Some you might not be moved by or interested in, and some may resonate, but I think it's, especially at the undergraduate level, well worth looking into those. Yeah, I think that's a start anyway. Yes.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you, I agree with your son about the shock at not finding vegans at these animal welfare organizations. I don't want to call them animal rights. So other than the Non-Human Animal Rights Project, that's challenging the status of animals as property under the law. I mean, given the fact that they are property, there's very little that, I mean, unless I'm not, up to date on whether there's other organizations that are actually challenging the status of animals as property.
There are just a few.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to know what those are, number one. And number two, are you familiar with the critique of Professor Gary Francione? And I mean, I go back and forth because he's basically saying that that these organizations have sold the animals out.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree with him because his argument is very logical.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to refute based on, like your son said, they're not advocating for veganism as a moral baseline.
Right.
I mean, even like the environmental movement, like Greenpeace or whatever, I mean, the environmental movement should be advocating for veganism as a moral baseline, but because their donor base, they're so dependent on donations.
Yep.
That they don't want to upset people by saying like, you have to go vegan.
That's right. Yeah.
And so
It's
I'm
unfortunate,
like,
but
what
true.
do we do? I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, and I think it's all good. So as far as Gary Francione goes, he's a very compelling advocate for this this logic that that the problem that a lot of animal law scholars see in his advocacy, though, is that he's not really offering an alternative. He's very good at critiquing what the establishment is not doing right, and I agree with him. And then he makes a pitch about the whole world just needs to go vegan, and then we'll be all good. And that's certainly the goal, but getting there is going to be a process. And so, what are we doing in between there, where we are now, and that goal? There's just a lot of different places along that spectrum about where we can do good things for animals. And, I've always been torn about kind of that in your face, black and white sort of view of how we can do our best for animals versus being more pragmatic. I've been kind of torn Depends on what day of the week you catch me. But basically, I've tended to be more of a pragmatist, someone who straddles animal welfare and animal rights. With animal rights is always the goal, but animal welfare is some component of how we get there and still aspire to the animal rights vision. But yeah, I mean, as far as what the law really needs is the transformation on the ground. I mean, we need a better informed society. And the lecture I just gave at Northwestern, the one I'm giving tomorrow, talks about how just information dissemination is huge. I mean, I would have been vegan much earlier in my life if I had the right information. I was fed all these lies growing up. Steak is what's for dinner, milk does a body good, and I remain the only plant-based eater in my entire Italian-American family on both sides. And I'm to this day vilified as a freak for making that lifestyle choice and pretty much excommunicated from family gatherings. So it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be so radical to choose to live a animal-friendly lifestyle, a healthier lifestyle. And it's just undoing so much disinformation and cultural values that are just misplaced. And so one documentary that I like the most for men, I mean, you don't have to think hard about what's wrong with the vegan and animal advocacy movement. It's 95% female. And, I agree the future is female. I'll be the first one to admit that, but we're not going to get there fast enough if it's so predominantly female, because half of our society is male. And so I think a lot of the things to get over with men is this whole machismo about what goes with a meat-based diet. And that documentary that really did it the best, you've probably seen it. I'm forgetting the name on this one too. Game Changer. So what was really powerful about that messaging was that, everything that men value, this kind of athletic prowess and, pardon me, but sexual prowess too, how science is supporting that a plant-based diet is going to get you to be the best man you can be by being a vegan. And they had never heard that before, and it changed a lot of minds pretty quickly. And my son and I certainly have experienced that directly in terms of our competitive athletic endeavors. So I think it's just about information like that, getting out and breaking down all the misinformation. And so I think humane education in public schools is huge that way. That if and I even have a debate with my daughter and son-in-law about this, because they're raising their daughter as someone who eats meat regularly, and yet she really likes vegetables. And so my wife and I are on the periphery and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to help her make her own choices in a way that's going to be meaningful and not feel like she's railroaded into a meat-based diet is the way to go. So yeah, I think the law depends on these cultural values shifting, and the values will only shift when we get the right information out to the public. As an environmental law professor, I never even thought once about how I could do better for the environment through my food choices until I taught animal law, and that's crazy. Most of my environmental law colleagues eat steak for dinner, and I just don't understand why it's such a stark divide. It has to change. Yeah.
We have 2 questions online. Mm-hmm. The first is, if I'm unable to secure a summer internship that is specifically related to animal law, would a volunteer animal care position at a sanctuary or something like that be a valuable addition to a resume, or do you feel that would be too far removed?
No, I think that's very relevant. And I think one thing that is helping animal law is that it is so interdisciplinary that working relationships with all institutions that engage with animals is always valuable. So veterinarians, animal sanctuaries, believe it or not, even zoos. I mean, any place that has some kind of care role for animals is worthy of exposure as an undergrad to get a feel for what our society, how our society is engaging with animals, how it needs to change. It's very, very informative to be exposed to those kinds of experiences in an undergrad context. And I think that's, there's more of that interdisciplinarity going on with animal law now, that I've got colleagues who I'm actually co-editing a special issue of a journal on animal environmental issues, and two of the co-editors are veterinarians, which is really, really very informative. So I think there's a whole lot of good volunteer work involving animals, other than like dog sitting, if that involves kind of institutional relationships to animals that I think are really valuable to do.
And the other question, I graduated from Lewis and Clark's Animal Law LLM in 2020 and am now back in my home country of New Zealand. Do you have any advice for animal advocates outside of the United States for making themselves attractive to US and other international NGOs, universities, etc.? Or will US organizations generally only consider candidates based in the United States?
Yeah, that's a real bias that I loathe about US legal employers. Because I'm now working at a law school that has an LLM program. I've never taught LLMs before this year, and I'm getting much more aware now of how LLMs struggle to get US jobs when they want to stay in the US. And a lot of it is that built-in bias that you're not a JD, you're not an American trained lawyer, and therefore we're going to likely dip into our American trained lawyer pool before we consider you, which is crazy. I mean, there are so many outstanding lawyers that are not US trained, and some of them are partly US trained. They have an LLM from a US law school, but the fact that it's not a JD, there's some kind of implicit bias against the quality of law training that's not a US JD, which is ridiculous. So I think a lot of it, to the extent it is about positioning yourself to be hired for a US job in these NGOs, it goes back to the mentoring points. It goes back to potential employers knowing you as a person and as a professional. That's really always in everybody's interest, that you're so much more likely to get hired if people know you as a person, have some sense of what you're capable of, and you're not just a resume and not just a category of a non-US lawyer versus a US lawyer. So I think there's, I've had some former students who also pursued either an environmental LLM at Lewis and Clark or an animal law LLM there, and it's an outstanding education, but it doesn't translate into a job when you're done. You have to do all that hard work of getting the right mentors to open the doors and getting the internships while you're there and starting to blaze that trail. Because it is an outstanding program, but the number of students getting that degree and the number of jobs that are available, you're going to have to work really hard, even if you're graduating at the top of your class. Those opportunities are hard to secure, and any employer will tell you they don't want to hire strangers. They don't want that unnecessary risk of someone who's not going to be the right fit and someone who's not aligned with their values. It's very hard to glean from a resume. So it is about building those personal relationships as much as possible. Yeah.
Is there a list, like a comprehensive list of all these positions that you can talk about, these organizations that do this work that we can access? For somebody who's like not very familiar with animal law?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would think that on Google, if you were to just type in, animal law public interest groups, you would likely get a fairly comprehensive list of the ones I have in mind. I mean, it's not that long a list. We're talking about a dozen that are really well established in animal law work. Some of them intersect a little bit with environmental, and some of them are animal rights, some of them are animal welfare, but it's a pretty discrete list. I'd be happy to share the ones that I'm familiar with. I mean, I've mentioned most of them already. There are just some that are a little bit lesser known, a little newer that are also important to be aware of. And a lot of those are really just a matter of where you are based and where you intend to practice, and just kind of, and that's why those state and local bar associations are so valuable, because they know those folks, and those folks are in those networks, so you meet them directly. So I think that's really important, that you're just talking to people who are familiar with where these opportunities might be if they're not easily accessible through an internet search or some other website that's compiling that information. It's never going to be exhaustive.
I think we have time for one more question.
or more than one.
Sorry. I just wanted to know, you said erasing extinction, that was one film I have not heard of.
Racing, not erasing, racing.
Racing.
Racing extinction, yes.
Oh, raising or,
Racing, R-A-C-I-N-G,
okay, racing.
yes,
Thank you.
sure.
What do you see as the next biggest topics in animal law? Like, what do you see as the biggest topics in animal law over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I'm involved with, I think is very much at the cutting edge right now, and that's just creative theories to establish legal personhood for animals. So this is something that, strangely enough, is gaining a lot of traction in environmental law. So we're seeing rivers being recognized as legal persons. We're seeing movements to have AI recognized as legal persons. Corporations and ships are already legal persons, and yet somehow animals that are so much like us are not getting recognized with legal personhood. So a lot of the creative work that these high-level NGOs are doing is different angles on that. So the Non-Human Rights Project is most well known for this work, and they're bringing these habeas corpus petitions because habeas corpus is something that prevents persons who are wrongfully detained and seeking a right to free them from that confinement. And person doesn't have to be limited to human. So that's the argument there. And then PETA brought a case involving Tilikum, the orca at SeaWorld. And that's another one, Blackfish, if you haven't seen that one. Same idea, that in that case, it was the 13th Amendment arguing that Tilikum was being held in violation of our 13th Amendment prohibiting slavery. And ultimately that argument didn't stick. And that one wasn't perhaps as compelling as the habeas corpus argument, because our 13th Amendment does have language that suggests it's meant to apply only to humans. It says except for commission of a crime, and orcas can't commit crimes. But nonetheless, it was still a theory to push that advocacy that our thinking about person should not be limited to humans. And then there was another strategic case by PETA, the Naruto, the monkey case, the monkey selfie case, which is highly, all you have to do is type that into the internet, you'll see these great selfies of a monkey. And that was under the Copyright Act, saying that this monkey that had taken photos in the Indonesian rainforest, that the monkey should have the copyright to those photos, because the Copyright Act protects any person who has taken photographs, and person is not defined to mean human. They lost that case too, but that's the persistence and creativity that goes into this. You just keep trying, and sooner or later, you're going to get the traction you need with the right court.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I see you had your email address. Well, you had your email address up there.
Well, I've got business cards up there. Happy to continue the conversation here and by email, and to be a resource at any questions you have.
Yeah, if you want to